All right. Hello. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome everyone to Connect Africa media platform. We are here today. Of course, this is our bi-weekly session every Tuesday and Thursday where we bring uh, issues that are happening in our continent, in Africa, and globally that affects Africa and discuss it from the Pan-African perspective. For tonight, our topic is actually Ethiopia's, the news that break out recently, Ethiopia seeking to join BRICS. And also at the same time, the news that came from the US government that the revocation of the human rights violation designation on Ethiopia. So we are going to analyze this side by side. I am joined here by Kwame Gonza and Lambert Ibutu. Welcome, brothers. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. Thank you for having us today.
Same, Mahlet. Thanks for. It's been a while since I was last in this, in this kind of engagement. So it's good to be back.
We are happy, and it's a pleasure and honor to have you here. So Kwame is he's our weekly analyst here every Tuesday and Thursday, and Lambert very sometimes he join us, but as he said, it has been a while, but it's always a pleasure to have him here. Just one new thing. Ever since he disappeared, what happened is, we have said it before on the platform, he's the founder of the africainterest.org. So you need to visit that website. It's a Pan-African platform, so you need to check out that website. Without further ado, we are going to go to our talking points or questions for tonight, just for our audience, to make it easier. Where we are going to talk about how Ethiopia's potential, what kind of benefit it will bring for Ethiopia, for the region, and the timing of it, both for Ethiopia and for the US to break this news. So we will go through them one by one. I will start because I am here by my right side. I see Kwame, and I'm going to start with him. As we heard it, from different individuals, analysts, and then also media outlets, Ethiopia joining BRICS is actually, given its economy, which is less than half of South Africa, which has the least GDP in BRICS, who are from the members of BRICS. What do you think is the potential of Ethiopia joining BRICS?
Thank you, Mahlet. I think there is, first of all, I want to thank my brother Lambert for being here. I think that there's a lot of things which are very important here. The recognition that we are entering a global world that is multipolar, I think that is one of the benefits. It would help that Ethiopia would add itself to South Africa, for Africa to have a stronger voice in the BRICS itself. And of course, with the other African countries which are interested in joining BRICS. So I think that it would magnify, it would be beneficial to Africa, not only to Africa, but to Ethiopia itself. If Africa's voice is magnified by Ethiopia's joining, BRICS or the global stage, and in this era in which we are living in, that is number one, which I notice when it comes to Africa as a whole. But with that being said, there's a lot of other things which you can talk about. For example, if you look at BRICS, it has more than 41% of the global population, and I think that this is a huge market for Ethiopia, to be able to trade, with these countries. If you look at the total GDP of the BRICS countries is, more than $28 trillion. And we have the United States with $24 trillion has been, trying to press Ethiopia down and bringing it on its knees so that it can beg. But when you look at BRICS, you have this huge market, which is even bigger than the United States market, of more than 3.27 billion people, almost, it is almost close to half of the global population. So you have access to this, market when you look at it. So it would help Ethiopia economically. And you have also the fact that Ethiopia has the Ethiopian Airlines, which is out of Africa. It would help the tourism industry, not only Ethiopia, but also, the whole of the African continent, because majorly the Ethiopian Airlines, you can see that it is very focused. Ethiopian Airlines is being looked at right now as the flagship airlines of the African continent, if I'm not mistaken. And Ethiopia itself is the logistics sort of capital of the African continent. So I think that actually Ethiopia should be looking into partnering with countries like Brazil, which are already into manufacturing of aircraft. Of course, Russia is also into that, the manufacturing of aircraft. You can see China also has launched its own narrow-body aircraft. It is trying to start to manufacture its own aircraft. So you can see that Ethiopia has access to this technology. In addition to the market, the huge market of 3.27 billion people, it has access now also to capital. You can say that it has access to capital because BRICS now, the new development bank, which has been launched by BRICS. So there's huge advantages when I look at Ethiopia that Ethiopia can take advantage of. And on the other side, when you look at the African continent, we don't have actually a shipping line all over the African continent. So I think these are things which Ethiopia would look into to try to enhance its position, not only on the continent, but even on the global stage. That if you start a shipping line, then you have almost permanently positioned Ethiopia as the logistics capital of the African continent, not only the aviation capital and the administrative capital of the continent, but now it means you have positioned it as the logistics capital of the world. And of course, it can work, even though Ethiopia is still landlocked, but I think it can still work with countries like Djibouti and Eritrea, to be able to achieve these objectives. So this is what I see that is beneficial if Ethiopia is able to join the BRICS group of countries.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for listing out those what Ethiopia can bring, its potential, and also both what it can bring if it joins BRICS. Now let's go to Lambert. Lambert, Ethiopia announced this recently last week, I think beginning of last week, if I'm not mistaken. It could have announced it during, the foreign ministers meeting, the foreign ministers of BRICS meeting beginning of June, where most of the countries that announced who wants to join BRICS, but it chose specifically this time. And on the same day, we also have heard or read from the U.S. government with its own media outlet saying that it has revoked the Ethiopia's the human rights violation designation on Ethiopia, which is almost hard. It's very hard to say this is a coincidence. Now, what is your view on this? Let's talk about maybe from the US, from both sides. I mean, there seems to be a motive, a deliberate action for choosing this time. How do you view this? Let's start with Ethiopia.
Lambert, unmute yourself.
Is he frozen? Can you hear us, Lambert?
There's connection problem. Lambert, you have to unmute yourself. Lambert, unmute yourself.
No, you cannot. How come?
I am unmuted.
Okay, now it's good.
Okay, I was saying that Malik, thank you for your question, and then of course Kwame has responded to the potential of Ethiopia in regard to its potential to join the BRICS. You mentioned of this. It might open that in this nothing comes as a coincidence. I think that, in politics,
you are breaking, Lambert. You're breaking.
Oh my God, my network. I don't know. You can hear me?
Now it's good, but okay, start now to answer when you talk.
I was saying that in great power politics, nothing is a coincidence, certainly. And I think
again, you're kind of breaking. No, actually now you are frozen.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we are losing him. He has very good information. He was starting to give.
Ethiopia
we lost you for a minute, Lambert. We were not hearing you again.
My God, my network isn't good. Okay, so I was saying that nothing is a coincidence in politics. It cannot be a coincidence that Ethiopia announced its intention to join the BRICS, and at the same time, the US announced that it was revoking its human rights designation. Of course, it comes with many connotations. Number one, what was the purpose of designating Ethiopia as a country where there are human rights abuses in the first instance? Then how come that they are removing it now at this point? One of the things that came to my mind, the same moment I saw the US saying it had removed the designation, the moment Ethiopia announced that it was joining the BRICS, everybody was speaking of this to be a reaction by the US to Ethiopia announcing it's joining the BRICS. Of course, most people see the BRICS as an alternative to NATO. So the impression, which for me began from actually Western media, was that the US was trying to lure back Ethiopia and say, come on, don't join the BRICS because it may not serve their interests, since the BRICS seems to be seen as an opponent, or we say an alternative to NATO. Now, that is easy to think, and of course, it could be true. But I'm thinking, when something seems so obvious, then sometimes you go to ask yourself that, is it really that obvious? Because in any case, while of course the West and of course the US particularly wouldn't want or wouldn't be so happy for major powers in Africa like Ethiopia to join, a rival alliance like the BRICS, I don't think it's enough reason to cause the US to lift their human rights designation on Ethiopia. So I was thinking, perhaps this is what they want us to think. Now, this is a perspective very few people have seen. Perhaps this is what the US wants us to think. Perhaps this is what the government of Ethiopia itself, I'm sure Ethiopians may not buy this opinion so popularly, and maybe those who are in government, because then we are thinking in the boardroom and not taking what they're giving us. But also, I could be wrong, of course. But I'm thinking, maybe this is what the government of Ethiopia wants us to think, that they have lifted the human rights designation because they were trying to join the BRICS. Maybe what the US government wants us to think is that they lifted the human rights designation on Ethiopia because Ethiopia was joining the BRICS. Now, that is almost the pattern you are going to conclude. And that's exactly what about 90, maybe even 100% of people concluded. And people were debating, yes, you see, when we choose to join the BRICS, now you are lifting this. and they had set the narrative, they had set the kind of debate they wanted. We were now debating the merits and demerits of the US responding to Ethiopia joining the BRICS. But my personal opinion, coming from a point of suspicion, was that for the US to lift that designation on Ethiopia, it could only come based on something much bigger. I know that Ethiopia has been, like any other government that is recovering from war, a war where the US was said to have been partly involved. We know that the US has been a significant player in the conflict in Ethiopia. And I know, everybody knows, that the government of Ethiopia has been having negotiations. You can call them negotiations or talks with the US. Over time, the human rights designation meant that the Ethiopia was no longer eligible for some kind of grants and help and aid from the US. And I know that given the post-war time, Ethiopia is rebuilding, and I know that it's in the interest of the government of Ethiopia, it's in the interest of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia to rebuild relationships with the West, because, well, you can't exist as an island, and the fact is that the US has been a major aid giver to Ethiopia. So it's obvious any government in Ethiopia would want some kind of good relationship, especially now that the war is over. But I know that politics is about a give and take. What are you putting on the table? What are we taking? So what did it be? And for me, that is the first principle of negotiation or relationships within countries, especially countries that deal in interests, like the US. The US is an interest state. They have no friends. They deal on the basis of interests. What do you have on the table? And this is what we give. So under those circumstances, I'm thinking, would the US just react to Ethiopia joining BRICS by doing something, removing, you could say, a chain that they have always tied on Ethiopia's legs, simply because it is joining BRICS? If anything, BRICS is just beginning. It may pose a threat in the long term, and I think that BRICS offers benefits which are not immediate so much. So I imagine the US could still play a delay game even if Ethiopia joined BRICS. I don't think it is something that would cause the US to lift these sanctions. Because for me, the sanctions have been one way of the US policing and keeping the government of Ethiopia in check. Now, with all these suspicions in my mind, I'm thinking, what then could have caused them to lift the sanctions? And that is the discussion the people in Africa and everywhere should have been involved in the moment those sanctions were lifted. But then I'm thinking, maybe that's the discussion that the US did not want people to be involved in. Maybe that's the discussion that the government of Ethiopia did not want people to be involved in, asking why have they lifted the sanctions. By the way, I say this not because I think the sanctions were justified. Of course, they were not. I'm totally against sanctions. What I'm discussing here is the basis for lifting them, not their justification. So I'm thinking the US and the government of Ethiopia could not have wanted us to discuss the reasons behind the lifting of the sanctions. And if they didn't want us to discuss the reasons behind the lifting of the sanctions, then it must be that it involved concessions between the US to the government of Ethiopia and concessions from the government of Ethiopia to the US, which they don't believe might be something that is music to the ear to the common people in Ethiopia or to Africa as a continent. So to avoid that kind of discussion, they had to give a diversion. And the issue of BRICS for me came in as that diversion. So you join BRICS, we shall lift these sanctions, and everybody will be talking and saying they have lifted them because you have joined the BRICS. And therefore nobody is thinking critically and looking at the other potential reasons. So we can discuss either today or another day the possible reasons why the sanctions may have been lifted, which would mean that I would go in detail and discuss the possible concessions. I began by saying that the US operates on interests. What has Ethiopia accepted to do? What has the government of Ethiopia, what concessions has the government made to the US to cause them to lift these sanctions? Because these sanctions in Ethiopia, like in any other part of the world, is the only weapon the US oftentimes has against governments. They use it to cripple you. They use it to hold you back. They've done it in Zimbabwe. They've done it in so many other countries to hold them back. And Ethiopia has been one of the victims. take the example of Eritrea. Eritrea is still under sanctions from the US. Yes. Are you telling me today, because Eritrea and Ethiopia are all at the Horn of Africa, and I'm so sure that the US would want to have relationships with both Ethiopia and Eritrea. If Eritrea chose today to join the BRICS, would the US lift its sanctions? I mean, if you want to think at the most basic level. So I'm thinking it can't be simply because Ethiopia has joined the BRICS. I think, in my suspicious mind, that the government of Ethiopia has made some significant concessions to the government of the US. What are those concessions? Perhaps that's a discussion for another day. But they must be big enough to warrant the US and convince the government in Washington to finally lift those sanctions. Those sanctions from Ethiopia. So the timing, it isn't a coincidence. I think it was something that is planned, most likely between both governments.
A very interesting perspective that you have brought to us. So with that, it's not only the US, but also Ethiopia's timing is just like the US want us, to forget the justification why in the first place that it has put that designation on Ethiopia. Ethiopia also, or the Ethiopian government wants us to think, oh, because of this, now the US is lifting the sanction, for us not to talk about this possible or potential concessions that the two governments have made behind the scene. Will your analysis or suspicious can also take us what concessions that can be?
No, that would be a much deeper discussion, Mahlet. But I know that there's quite a lot of concessions, of course. One of them, incidentally, and we must not take these concessions as being mutually exclusive or independent of perhaps not desiring Ethiopia to ally with the other powers, like in the BRICS. So for me, the issue of the BRICS could be just one of these concessions. I mean, one of these things that the US wouldn't like them to do. But there are others, of course. We know that the geopolitics within the region has been, is changing. We see the influence of Russia, China, and other rivals of the US becoming more involved at the Horn of Africa. You've recently seen that the government of Eritrea has opened up and has been a lot more relating with Russia and China. For some reason, the West had done what you could call a media blockade on Eritrea, but China and Russia gave the leader of Eritrea a voice and spoke out to the world. What am I meaning? There has been a clear alignment of China and Russia with Eritrea, and I think that knowing the way the US operates, the US will always have a particular government or a particular person in a particular region whom they use as an anchor to be its point of control of the region. Yes, and in recent times, particularly considering the way the war went, and now with the US so sure, you see the recent visit, the recent romance between Eritrea and China and Russia, which are the main allies of rivals of the US with Eritrea. That romance has almost closed an avenue of the US ever building a formidable relationship with Eritrea. Now, with that door closed, the US clearly needs an ally still within the Horn. And Eritrea, of course, has a historically better relationship with the US. Now, I'm thinking, in order to keep its foot at the Horn of Africa, keeping foot at the Horn of Africa means policing the Horn of Africa. I think that the US would want Ethiopia to remain the policeman of Africa with a little relationship with Ethiopia. And I think that the question then becomes, I don't touch this issue because it's a bit sensitive, especially given this post-war period, because Ethiopia has just signed peace, and we know that Eritrea, Ethiopia were strong players within within everything that has happened. And but what I would just say, Mahlet, is that the US doesn't like Eritrea. That is known. There, it is no secret, and I think they don't not think even this isn't a secret. The good blood, the good relationship that the government of Ethiopia, or basically let's just say the rebuild relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea, is not something that the West likes. The West operates on the basis of divide and rule, and they know that for as long as Eritrea and Ethiopia are not in good terms, they will always rule the Horn of Africa. Now, the rebuilding of the relationship between President Isaias of Eritrea and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia in recent years is not something that the US likes. And I can assure you, it is the one thing that the US works night and day to split. Mm-hmm. The question is the government of Ethiopia finally beginning to concede and perhaps tell the US that it's okay, we shall not build a much stronger relationship, or we shall end here? I mean, the point is, are they beginning to, because I know whether someone likes it or not, it must be at the core of the discussions, at the core of the interest of the US, that Ethiopia should not relate well with Eritrea. The question is, has the government of Ethiopia finally begun to make concessions to that extent? I'm not saying they have. I'm just saying, could they have? That could be one possible, concession that they could have made. And there's so many other concessions. For example, you've seen your government, and I think this is something that the Eritreans need to look at. I mean, that Ethiopians need to have discussions more about internally. Mm-hmm. You've seen of late, I think your government is tending towards privatization. I haven't looked deep, but I see that the state of Ethiopia has often had a bigger say on state corporations and the rest. And I can assure you, whatever state of development Ethiopia is in up to this moment has been based on its development model. The failure of African countries from the very beginning of independence was the failure was developing a development model. From when we got independence, African countries pursued a development model that has failed to reconcile opportunities with their potential within a country. Now, this is not something that Ethiopia was vulnerable towards, because like most African countries, even I'll give you the example of Uganda. When we began in the early 60s, 70s, the state was more involved. Privatization was less, and the state had a bigger say on the economy. And at that point, I can assure you, it was one of the best times and the best moments when our economy was so strong. And the failure of most African countries post-independence was to pursue this model, was to give in to the SAPs, the structural adjustment programs, where you had to begin to open up the market to private sector development. Of course, it has its own merits, but it's my personal opinion that the government should always have a say, especially on sectors of the economy which are key to development. You're looking at health, you're looking at education, you're looking at the finance sector. And now, this is something Ethiopia has avoided until almost this moment now, that we are beginning to see the government of Ethiopia opening up. Of course, they can have their reasons. Privatization has its own merits, but you will notice that it is a basic development model of the World Bank, of the World Economic Forum, which are all extensions of the US government. The basic model is actually privatization. And again, for perspective, you will appreciate that one of the fundamental disagreements of Eritrea, for example, with the US is actually on privatization. If you read some of the arguments the president of Eritrea often gives in regard to what led to a break between their relationship with the US, it was the insistence of the US and other Western countries that Eritrea should privatize. And because the government refused to privatize, it led to that break in the relationship. It is at the fundamental level of their quarrel, but it hasn't been the case with Ethiopia. Now the question is that one of the concessions that the government of Ethiopia should begin to concede and open up its market to privatization? We're not the beneficiaries of privatization, especially in a country like Ethiopia. We know that you Ethiopians, however good you are, you can't compete with the Western companies if they come and they have their money. So, yes, you can't compete with them. I mean, it has its merits, but I believe that That has been a major point. So, but one, in terms of with Eritrea, government of Ethiopia considered in terms of its
We
privatization.
lost you for a few seconds, please, because we don't want to miss anything.
I was saying that to conclude this, among other reasons and possible concessions, the two which immediately come to my mind is the first one is this: what has the government of Ethiopia considered in terms of its relationship today and in the future going forward, especially as the multipolar world emerges? What has it considered in terms of its relationship with Eritrea? Number one. Number two, what has it considered in terms of its economic policy, especially in regard to privatization? The rest can be there. Now, that's of course on the side of on the side of Ethiopia. You could also discuss and say what has the US considered in regard to Ethiopia. But I think in this case, we care more about Ethiopia because if anything, if there's anything the US has considered, I don't think nothing are there. It's not an often. We know the US doesn't deal as a net.
You're breaking again.
In terms of equals, they deal in terms of their master and
The US, what? We lost you
Hello?
again for seconds. You said we know the US will not what?
No, the US deals doesn't deal on the basis of equality. We know that. So I would imagine what also did they concede? But that would be to mean that what did they say they will do to Eritrea? I mean to Ethiopia if they did that. But I think they should have made more promises, of course. One being, of course, that you do this, then we are assuming, assuming I'm right, assuming it is true that the government of Ethiopia has considered in terms of its relationship with Eritrea. Assuming number two, I'm correct, that that it has also made concessions in its economic policy, especially in regard to privatization. It could be then that the US said, okay, fine, you do that, plus maybe some other concessions, and we shall lift the designation. And of course, lifting the designation means that you become eligible again for our funding, for our aid. Now, that's my wild idea. Might be true, might not be true, but I suppose it's something worth discussing.
Very, very interesting. And I'm glad that I asked then, to travel again more with your suspicious mind. What could that be? So, yeah, because it's interesting. Recently, I've been reading, actually, it's a couple of days ago, that Ethiopia, I don't know how much credible it is, and Eritrea or Eritrea has agreed, the governments have agreed to continue their relationship only in secret, not to make it obvious like state to state like before. But I don't know how much true is that. Actually, it needs to be examined. Where does their relation stand now? Perhaps our analysts from Eritrea might comment on that. Maybe it's another topic by itself. I know that Lambert, you will leave us earlier, and we started late. But I have one more question. But before we go to the next question, I would like to invite Kwame, to comment on this. Yeah, Kwame.
Thank you, Mahlet. Lambert, thank you very much. You've given me really something to think about. You've laid out some good points, very, very good points. But I just want you to allow me to think otherwise. I think that when it comes to the sanctions, there's one side which you have not spoken about. The fact that the United States, I think the fact that since the beginning of this conflict which we had in Ethiopia, in the northern part of the country, the United States has not gotten any victory worth of somebody conceding to or giving concessions to. If you look at how this conflict started, that Sisi, for example, when we had problems, Ethiopia had problems with Egypt, Prime Minister Abiy chose to go to the African Union. Sisi decided to go to the UN. That was number one loss for the United States, because Ethiopia did not fall in the trap of going to the UN, because I think that people like Prime Minister Abiy remembers what happened in Congo in 1960. That Nkrumah went and invited, we were discussing this yesterday actually. Nkrumah went and invited the United Nations into Congo, and what the United Nations ended up doing was killing the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Actually, the United Nations aiding the United States and its allies in killing. So I think that the United States is not, the United States has not got
Kwame,
legal.
a bit louder because I don't want us to miss this. We hear you, but it's getting long sometimes.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that the United States did not have any, let me say, secret that is worth conceding to, providing. You cannot hear me still?
It's low. Now good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm saying that the United States, from what it has achieved regarding the conflict which we have had, I mean, it may be possible what Lambert is saying. I'm not discounting it, but what I'm trying to say is that this is also worth thinking about. That the Prime Minister Abiy did not fight all this long since 2020 to reach here to give concessions to the United States. He did not, move all around the region, to mobilize the region and put trust in the African Union to solve this problem and reach this point and try to, to concede to the United States. What was also, if when we look at what was at stake for Ethiopia, if the sanctions were not lifted, if Ethiopia has been able to fight through all this propaganda, the BB, the machinery which they had put up against Ethiopia, we should ask ourselves, should we take it that at this point we think that Ethiopia can still not fight through, looking at the fact that it was able to fight through, that it should now want to concede to the United States in any way because they wanted to lift the sanctions. They wanted the United States to lift the sanctions. Now, when we look at AGOA, because AGOA is what has been put up in front very much, that Ethiopia would lose, opportunities, for trade and stuff like that. And of course, we saw some, apparel, clothing factories closed down because of this. The United States closed down some of its, factories which are associated with the United States, in line of AGOA. But it was the United States actually which was benefiting very much from this friendship, that it was getting cheap labor, in Ethiopia. They were manufacturing these clothes, in Ethiopia, and getting cheap labor. Okay, and then they are exporting these same clothes to the United States and saying that Ethiopia is the one exporting, when it was not true. It's the United States which was exporting and leaving behind crumbs that they were leaving to Ethiopia. So how much trade was this? I think that trade is not more than $150 million. The trade under AGOA, which Ethiopia, the goods which Ethiopia is sending to the United States every year annually under AGOA, I really don't think those goods are more than $150 million, just $1 million, not even a billion. Now, when we look at Ethiopia's economy, which is 100 and up to $120 billion, it's coming to $120 billion, an economy of that, I really don't think that you would give concessions just because of $150 million. So I just want us to give that a thought a little bit, when it comes to concessions. I would think that because Ethiopia has aligned, for example, the Eritrea, and also has aligned with Russia. If you remember, the foreign minister of Russia, Mr. Lavrov, Sergei Lavrov, when he came, he visited Ethiopia. You can see that. Immediately, the foreign minister of China, he was appointed, Mr. Wang Yi, who was the ambassador of China to the United States. Immediately, he was appointed as the prime minister. The first place he visited across the world, it was Ethiopia. So I think that Ethiopia cannot concede, cannot give concessions when it has these kind of relationships with China, with Russia, with Eritrea, with the regional countries, and it has attachment. Its economy is attached to all these countries. I think what is at stake when it comes to the relationships which Ethiopia has with these countries I've spoken about, the regional countries, Russia, China, what is at stake is much more than giving concessions to the United States. I think that it would not give concession to this. Now, when it comes to privatization, which Lambert spoke about, I think that Prime Minister Abiy, what he's trying to do is the same thing sort of what Deng Xiaoping did. Ethiopia's economy has been closed, for a long time. You remember that when Deng Xiaoping came to China, he opened the economy, okay? And private people started having, businesses in the country. They left private people to have economy, unlike the period of Mao Zedong. So I think this is what the Prime Minister, Abe, is trying to do right now, because its economy has sort of been in some way emulating what happened in China. The economic miracle which has been happening in China. If you look at the year 2007 and 2008, the Ethiopian economy was the fastest growing in Africa. It deposited 10% GDP growth. So that does not mean that the Prime Minister Abe cannot make mistakes. I think he may make mistakes. What I'm saying does not mean that he cannot do mistakes. And it does not mean that he's doing right. Me, myself, I'm worried, especially about Ethiopia Airlines, because that is a very big gift to the African continent. What the Ethiopian people built in Ethiopian Airlines is a gift to the African people. Now, for him to tamper with Ethiopian Airlines and do it the wrong way, it will be disastrous, not only for Ethiopia, but for the African continent. So I think that he's trying to walk that rope, that tight rope, to open up the economy to the extent that it will allow it to grow a little bit more. But whether he will do it the right way, that is another question.
Interesting. Yeah, Ethiopian Airlines is what everybody talking about, and considering the recent changes. Anyway, again, it's another topic for another day, but really thank you, both of you, for bringing this interesting perspective, Lambert, and then Kwame also for coming in and adding on this, sharing your view on this. Unless Lambert wants to, to add on this, I'm going to go to the next question. I have two things, and hopefully Lambert will stay with us. Now, you have mentioned, Lambert, that how Ethiopia's troubled relation during the war from 2020 to 2022, the pressure that the US and the West has put upon Ethiopia. Now that, from your analysis or perspective, I think what I understand is that it's something that they both agreed. I'm going into your mind, meaning, okay, you go ahead, meaning Ethiopia, you join BRICS, and we are going to, US also, we are going to lift up this sanction. But now by Ethiopia joining BRICS, if of course it's admitted, do you think that Ethiopia can still continue its foreign policy motto, which is the same for most African countries, that a non-alignment policy, that we are neither with the West nor with the East, because BRICS is mainly founded by the global side, by the global South. So do you think Ethiopia and even South Africa can continue saying that we are following a non-alignment policy?
Oh, Mahlet, first, that is so-called non-alignment policy is very subjective, honestly. But I still think that joining BRICS, I think that Ethiopia is actually going to join the BRICS, because on the basis of the critical factors within Ethiopia and its position within the Horn of Africa, but also its economy, because the BRICS is mostly of the emerging economies. The potential of Ethiopia to join the BRICS is very high. That I actually think the application among the countries which have applied to join should be accepted. So that doesn't mean can it still continue to claim that it is non-aligned in its policy? Yes, it can still. I think that joining this or that alliance does not automatically mean that you've chosen in matters different. That's why, for example, you can have a country belonging to a collective, but still taking a decision that is different. We still have what we call bilateral relationships, even among countries which are under the same umbrella. That's why you still have countries, Uganda relating with Kenya bilaterally, even when they are under the East African community. The idea is basically how you manage those kind of relationships. So yes, Ethiopia, so long as it desires to be non-aligned, it may not be in everything because circumstances change. South Africa, so long as it desires to remain non-aligned, can still remain non-aligned in different things. Because sometimes you choose on what basic principle, on which stand, on what matter, in which situation do you take a side? Do you take this side or that side, or do you remain in the middle? And if you take the example of Ukraine, yes, South Africa, for example, can still claim that it's not non-aligned. For example, until now, it has still claimed that it is non-aligned, despite being already a member of the BRICS. So I think that basically answers it. It's a member of BRICS, but it has maintained and said we are non-aligned on this particular matter, even when it involves a country that is a member of the BRICS, that is Russia.
Thank you, Lambert, for that. You have just touched upon it. Before I bring Kwame, if you can elaborate on that, because I have it as a question, so perhaps you might answer it related to this. What is the probability of Ethiopia joining BRICS? That gives it a higher probability, as you said, other than in the region. Also, if it joins, what does it mean for the region? And yeah, why Ethiopia actually?
Ethiopia has consistently been one of the fastest growing economies within the region first. So from an economic perspective, it offers high prospects, Then too, it is because you see, until now, it is very difficult for anybody to define what exactly BRICS as an alliance is. Somebody can, there have been arguments about NATO, that NATO, others say it's a military alliance or all that. If I ask to define in a sentence what BRICS is, most people will struggle because for some reason NATO is the BRICS is at a formative stage where so many things are going to take place, but you can't ignore the fact that where big economies and big countries in different parts of the world are coming together, there are some unmentioned facts. Number one, the geopolitics is involved. You cannot differentiate such an alliance from having anything to do with security, which has all to do with the location. And Ethiopia is found in a part of the world that's very geopolitically significant. Number two, the economics, of course, like I said, Ethiopia has been one of the fastest growing economies in the region. So if you look at it from an economic perspective, Ethiopia still ticks the box. And then also Ethiopia's, Ethiopia has if you look at it from a historical perspective, it is one of these countries that represents something unique within the African continent. I wouldn't think that another country would, for any reason, be put ahead of Ethiopia, because in many ways Ethiopia is a leader within Africa. We have been lamenting on the possible challenges to do with the Eritrean airlines. There is so much where Eritrea has shown Africa leadership, and I think that those within the BRICS would want this kind of uniqueness of Ethiopia, and it is sense of leadership that is almost by birth. If you look at it from a country perspective of Africa, you look at it, there are so many fasts which are associated with Ethiopia for Africa. Apart from the history, what we all know, uncolonized, that's one. But two, even if we look at it at the present level, we have the best airlines in Africa coming from Ethiopia. You can look at the current project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's again another flagship project where Ethiopia has taken leadership in the development of resources. So it's more like if I was in BRICS, if I was China, if I was Russia, and other BRICS countries, especially the ones outside Africa, I would be very interested in bringing in a country which I know can show leadership to other countries, especially if that country is in a part of the world where we would want to have influence in at the end of the day, because Africa remains a part of the world where everybody would want to relate with because of our basic material, human, and capital resources. So how do you take charge of Africa? How do you, for example, influence the rest of Africa? You use a particular country that's already a natural born leader of that region. You use a country that's already showing leadership. And I think that Ethiopia, in many ways, has shown Africa leadership straight from the days of colonialism to this very moment, even in the days of struggle. I can assure you, I was in Ethiopia about 2 weeks ago. I was in Addis. And you would understand why Ethiopia is something that most countries look forward to. What Ethiopia has been able to accomplish during the 2 years of war is something that most other countries haven't been able to accomplish even in 10 years. I can assure you, within Africa. What do I mean? That in a sense, there is a mental orientation within the psyche of the Ethiopian community that even at the point of their worst, even at the point when they are at war, the world doesn't stop moving. For some reason, they seem to have, and then also, by the way, don't overlook the significance of the Pretoria Agreement, the peace agreement between the government of Ethiopia and the TPLF that brought back peace and sanity to Ethiopia. In how many parts, in how many countries in Africa have there been sustainable peace agreements where there is conflict? Very few. So until now, you can't say the one for Ethiopia hasn't worked. It is working. There was war, the guns have been silenced. You can talk about whether it will hold or not, but at least for now, you have to give it a positive and say that it is one of the few countries in Africa which have been able to go to war and for some reason negotiate a peaceful end to the war and the guns are put down. That is significant. Another point of leadership for other countries in Africa. Another point of leadership for Sudan. Another point of leadership for the warlords in Somalia. Another point of leadership for those in Mali. Another point of leadership for every part of Africa which is at war, that you can actually arrive at a peaceful solution. And then beyond that, the manner, maybe not just the peace agreement, but the manner in which they arrived in that peace agreement, I think it's the first most significant peace agreement that has been signed or arrived at under the auspices purely of this ideal that the African Union now is trying to put forward. That is the idea of African solutions to African problems, purely mediated by Africans, from beginning to end. And there is no country outside Africa that can claim.
But Lambert, would you say that even regardless of, I'm not against peace, but even regardless of with all, the lack of accountability and everything, it's
No,
still.
Mahlet, that's a different question. You can talk about the modalities involved. I could say, well, while there's peace, we need reconciliation. We need people need to talk because healing takes a process. Peace alone is enough. Should I call it peace? Let me call it the silencing of guns. No guns are shooting. So perhaps you could say it's not exactly peace because peace is a broad concept. But the guns have been silenced. Nobody is shooting at each other, at least for now. Now, for me, that is significant. The rest can come. By the way, at the end of the day as well, you still got to maintain that the first step towards even reconciliation is first the guns also have to go down because you can't talk, you can't reconcile, you can't do all this, dispense justice to those who did wrong and did wrong when war is going on. So the first step is the silencing of the guns, and I think that Ethiopia has taken that step. That can be a discussion, Malik, for another day, on the merits of the peace. But at least the fact is that Ethiopia has given leadership, even in terms of conflict management. And again, if I am Russia, if I'm China, if I'm an alliance like the BRICS, I want a country like that one, which shows example to others, especially if it's in a region of the world where we want to have influence. So again, even there, Ethiopia would score. more than, for example, if you said Uganda or any other country, you would say, okay, fine. What is there? What would Rwanda, what would Kenya, what would Ethiopia, what would Eritrea, what would Mali, Senegal want to learn from Uganda? I'm sure if you ask the same question about Ethiopia, any other country will have a lot of things to spell out and say this and this and this is something that we want to learn from Ethiopia, regardless of its weaknesses.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting perspective again by Lambert. But let me just stick back to the question from our continent, I mean, from Africa. It's Algeria and Egypt. At least those are the names that are mentioned in media who requested to join BRICS. Do you think that now if we add Ethiopia in that line, Ethiopia would still have a higher probability? Let's assume that it's only one country from the continent that will join. Do you think Ethiopia will have a higher chance than those Northern African countries?
Well, I don't know the basic credentials that would be required. Well, not the basic, but maybe the fundamental, the ones that are really that would be required to join. But I would still put them on the same weighing scale based on those factors. These three countries: Algeria, Morocco. Is it Morocco you say? And
Egypt.
Ethiopia, and
Algeria,
Egypt.
yeah.
Yes, but so yes, I still think so. Although I don't know, Egypt, Morocco, there are other factors which might still. I think if the BRICS would rather go with Ethiopia, in my perspective, because there are so many factors involved in this. Number one, Algeria and Egypt sometimes seem to give the impression of an identity crisis, and a bit of that. So I know that those within BRICS would look at so many factors. Yeah, for example, Egypt belongs even to the Arab League, belongs to the African Union, belongs there, and that kind of positioning sometimes isn't good for an emerging alliance.
You're frozen. Lambert, are you there? You're breaking. Kwame, are you there? It looks like I think there's an internet or a connection problem. Kwame, do you hear us? It looks like Kwame is there, but for some reason we can't. It was really an interesting discussion. Hopefully we will have them back. Really, please. I mean, comment down in the chat section. I want to hear you, Aaron Black. Yeah, please. If you have any question, put it in the chat section, and if we have time, we will try to address your question. Kwame, are you there?
Yes, Malik.
Did you hear me? Yeah.
You were muted, Malik.
Sorry,
But I can hear
Sona,
you
I
now.
was just reminding you where you stopped. You were telling us how Ethiopia can have a higher chance than Algeria or Egypt, given the two countries' membership to the Arab League. So, if you want to conclude, you can conclude that, and I can invite Kwame to comment on this.
So, Malik, you've still broken up. Is Kwame still on?
No, now actually we have lost him. He's not there.
Okay, so yes, so I think Ethiopia would still tick all the boxes if you put it together with those other countries, you know, and still stand a better chance for admission than the rest. But well, there are different factors, and it depends really on what they're looking at. But based on those few, I think Ethiopia stands a much better chance.
Okay, if we do not, I will put this as a last question for you. If we don't find Kwame, but I really hope that he will join us back. Now let's assume that should Ethiopia join BRICS, we have touched upon what it can bring to the table as a country. But now, what can it bring to the region? Given that no Eastern African countries so far we have heard that applied to join BRICS. So if it join, what does that mean for this
I
troubled,
think
very fragile region?
Yes, I think it brings a bit more clout to the region. I think it makes Ethiopia a bit more have more weight within the region, which would mean that Ethiopia will be able to assert more influence within the region, in different ways. But also, Ethiopia will be in a position to leverage the alliances within the BRICS for the benefit of the whole of Africa. And you must not forget that the BRICS is mostly of countries that are not in NATO. Let's put it like that. You have Russia, you have China, you have India. Now, it would further mean that competition within the Horn of Africa becomes one between NATO and then BRICS. And I think that Ethiopia will have a very big part to play within that. So whatever advantages come with being a member of BRICS would be extended to the Horn of Africa. And by that extension, I think that the whole region would stand to benefit. But in the same way, it would mean that it also assumes the threats and the weaknesses that come with joining the alliance. Still, it would go beyond affecting Ethiopia to still affecting as well the region.
Thank you very much, Lambert. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that we cannot find Kwame, and I don't see him down here as well. But for us, as far as question concerned, regarding Ethiopia's move or application to join BRICS, and then the speculation surrounding its meaning the US also revoking the human rights violation designation on Ethiopia. So far, this was our analysis with Lambert Ibitu and Kwame Gonza. Unless you have some final words for our fellow Africans here, also for our viewers. What I can do is actually, there was one question I tried to address it. Somebody was asking, what are the basis if there is any criteria for BRICS to join, for countries to join BRICS. From what I heard, I think the Foreign Minister of South Africa said that not having that document is actually what makes it difficult to say anything. But if you have anything different, Lambert, you can share with us. And and your final words, and then we can close.
Oh, thank you, Mahlet. Like I said, it's been good being here again after such a long time. Hopefully, we'll have many more. BRICS is an alliance of emerging economies, and I think that it holds a lot of potential going forward, especially in light of the emerging multipolarity. Because at the end of the day, the development is no longer something that's limited to an individual country. We live in a world now where we can only develop together with others, and I think that is the basic concept behind BRICS. The same strength of NATO, for example, or even the very idea of integration. When we talk about integrating as a continent to become one, it's because we want to leverage the collective strength of a continent to put together our small strength and become strong as one. And that should be the same concept behind NATO. But I mean, behind the BRICS. But I think they go a step further to ensure that you must have a sense of relevance to this. It's not just a club where you come to be a member of. It is something to which others are asking, what do you bring on the table? What is the benefit of you being among us? And knowing your benefit, then they know that collectively, the alliance can become something big. I know that it's mostly looking to the economic, but I also know that it goes beyond that. Because if people sit in the same house and they discuss a matter A, so long as they're in the same house, they can also discuss a matter B. So they can as well discuss security and other things. So we'll see how this unfolds, of course, with the time. We'll see how it unfolds over the next 2-3 years. But the potential is high that this can be, an alternative organization that could begin to rival others within the continent. So that is that. I think I wish, of course, for Ethiopia's sake, it will be good for her to join. So whether or not it had to do with concessions, or it is genuine that that Ethiopia wants to join, and in my own opinion, I think it will join. It is something that will be good, not just for Ethiopia, and not only for the Horn of Africa. It also becomes good for Africa because we already have South Africa, and hopefully, if we have Ethiopia, then we have 2 more countries within Africa joining this.
Can you hear me, Lambert? I think you have.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you have finished, right? I am not cutting you because you are frozen.
Yeah, I'm done.
Well, yeah, it's so unfortunate that Kwame is not here, but we have covered most of the questions, or I think everything except that what we had for Kwame, but we did all cover it. We just wanted to share also his view, especially on the last one, what Ethiopia can bring if it joins BRICS. But I just heard from him that his battery, his iPad is dead, why he couldn't join. But thank you very much, Lambert. Really, it was a pleasure and honor to have you here. He has an excellent experience. Yeah, he has an excellent article that he has written on this, on Ethiopia joining BRICS. Please visit. As we speak, I'm going to write that Africa interests.org. And you all know, I almost forgot also, we have our website, connecttoafrica.org as well. Please, those of you who want to support our channel, you can support us. I will put it in the comment section as soon as this stream is over, through our PayPal account. But more so, what you can do is please share this video with your network in that way so that we can share each other with information and knowledge. Thank you very much again. Until we see you next week. That's it for us. Have a good evening and a great weekend as well. Thank you again, Lambert. Bye-bye.
Yeah, those people viewers. So where is Kwame?